In this episode, we're going to build a clear picture of what security testing really means when you are responsible for a program, not just a single tool or a single assessment. Security testing is the family of activities that helps an organization discover weaknesses, validate how serious they are, and learn whether defenses will hold up against realistic misuse. For beginners, it is easy to confuse testing with scanning, or to assume that a penetration test is the same thing as vulnerability management. But those are different activities with different strengths and limits. A mature security program uses multiple types of testing because each one answers a different kind of question, and together they reduce blind spots. By the end of this lesson, you should understand how scanning, penetration testing, and threat analysis fit together, how to manage them as an ongoing capability, and how to avoid the common traps that make testing feel expensive but not effective. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyber.author.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. When you manage security testing well, you are managing a pipeline of evidence about risk, not just generating reports. Scanning is usually about broad coverage and repeatable detection, meaning it finds many potential issues quickly and can be run regularly. Penetration testing is usually about depth and realism, meaning it explores how weaknesses can be chained together to create real impact under defined conditions. Threat analysis is usually about relevance and anticipation, meaning it helps you focus testing on what is most likely to matter given your assets, adversaries, and environment. These activities overlap, but they are not interchangeable, and confusion here creates waste. If you treat scanning results as proven exploit paths, you will overreact and overwhelm teams. If you treat penetration testing as a substitute for continuous scanning, you will miss many issues that appear between major tests. If you ignore threat analysis, you may test the wrong things deeply while your highest-risk pathways remain unexamined. A helpful way to think about scanning is that it is a screening process, similar to a routine checkup that looks for known patterns of weakness. Scanners often search for missing patches, insecure configurations, exposed services, weak versions of software, and other conditions that have been associated with compromise. The strength of scanning is consistency, because it can run on a schedule and produce comparable results over time, which helps you see drift and backlog. The weakness of scanning is that it does not fully understand context the way a human can, and it may produce false positives or findings that are technically true but not practically exploitable in your environment. Managing scanning, therefore, means managing both coverage and interpretation, because a program that floods teams with unfiltered findings will lose credibility. You want scanning to be frequent enough to be useful, stable enough to trend, and scoped enough that results can be owned and acted on. The output you want is not a huge list, but a steady flow of validated, prioritized work that shrinks exposure where it matters. Because scanning is broad, it must be guided by asset inventory and criticality, otherwise you will either miss important systems or waste effort scanning things that do not matter. Beginners sometimes assume scanning automatically covers everything, but scanners only find what they can reach, what they are pointed at, and what they are allowed to inspect. If an organization has unknown assets or unclear ownership, scanning results will reflect that weakness by showing gaps and inconsistencies. A well-managed program uses scanning to strengthen the organization's understanding of its environment by revealing where systems exist, where baselines differ, and where coverage is incomplete. This is also why scanning should be treated as part of configuration management and vulnerability management, not as a standalone activity. If a scan finds that a critical system is missing key settings, that is not only a vulnerability issue, it is also a drift issue. Managing testing well means you use scanning to identify where processes are failing, not only where software is outdated. Scanning also comes in different forms, and understanding the high-level differences helps you manage expectations. Vulnerability scanning focuses on known weaknesses, usually tied to software versions and configuration signatures. Configuration assessment focuses on whether systems align with a desired baseline, such as secure settings for authentication, logging, and network exposure. Application-focused scanning tries to detect weaknesses in how an application behaves, including how it handles input and how it enforces access rules. Each type can be useful, but each type has limits, and managing them means selecting the right type for the asset and the risk. For example, scanning can find missing patches quickly, but it may not fully capture how a specific business process could be abused. Application scanning can surface input handling issues, but it may not understand business logic weaknesses that require human reasoning. A mature program does not expect any one scanner to be perfect. It expects scanners to provide consistent signals that guide deeper analysis and remediation. Another area that often confuses beginners is the difference between finding vulnerabilities and validating vulnerabilities. Scanning produces findings, but validation is the step where you confirm what the finding means in your environment and how urgent it truly is. Validation includes confirming that the vulnerable component is present, that it is actually in use, that the exposure pathway exists, and that compensating controls are not already reducing the risk. Without validation, teams may spend time fixing items that are not real, or they may ignore real items because they have been burned by noise in the past. Managing testing means building a workflow where scanning findings are triaged, enriched with context like asset criticality and exposure, and then prioritized for action. This workflow is also where you control trust, because leaders and teams will judge the testing program by whether it produces actionable truth rather than confusion. When validation is done consistently, scanning becomes a reliable input to risk reduction rather than a recurring source of frustration. Penetration testing sits on the other side of the spectrum because it is designed to explore how an attacker could actually achieve impact, not just what weaknesses exist. Penetration testing is a controlled attempt to identify exploitable paths under defined rules, often including the idea that weaknesses can be chained together. A single weakness may not be disastrous by itself, but when combined with weak access control, missing monitoring, and poor segmentation, it can lead to a serious compromise. The value of penetration testing is that it reveals these real-world combinations and highlights failures in defensive assumptions. The limitation is that penetration tests are snapshots, meaning they represent a moment in time and a particular scope, and they cannot cover everything deeply. Managing penetration testing therefore requires careful scoping, clear objectives, and an understanding that the goal is learning and improvement, not humiliation. A program that treats pen testing as a trophy or a blame event will drive teams to hide issues and resist cooperation, which reduces the value dramatically. Scope and rules are the backbone of penetration testing management because they determine what the test can and cannot tell you. A test can be limited to certain systems, certain time windows, or certain attack types, and those limits are necessary to keep the test safe and ethical. At the same time, a scope that is too narrow can produce a false sense of security because the most important pathways may be out of scope. A well-managed test defines what is being tested, what success looks like, what must not be disrupted, and how findings will be communicated and validated. It also defines how the organization will respond if the test uncovers a serious weakness, because discovery without a response path can create panic or denial. Beginners sometimes assume the tester will handle everything, but the organization must be ready to receive results, prioritize fixes, and verify remediation. The pen test is not the end of the process. It is a learning event that should feed directly into remediation plans and control improvements. Penetration testing also needs to be connected to risk posture rather than treated as a standalone annual ritual. If the organization makes major changes, such as launching a new product, integrating a new partner, or changing identity systems, the risk landscape shifts, and testing should adapt. A common failure is running the same type of test on the same schedule while the environment evolves, which creates a mismatch between testing and real exposure. Another failure is using penetration testing as a replacement for good operational hygiene, like patching and configuration management, which leaves the organization exposed between tests. Managing testing means treating penetration tests as targeted depth exercises that complement continuous scanning, with focus areas chosen based on the most important assets and the most concerning risk drivers. When pen tests are planned this way, they become far more valuable because they validate whether the organization's defenses are holding where it matters most. They also reveal whether the organization can detect and respond, because a test that succeeds without being noticed often indicates visibility gaps. Threat analysis provides the third piece of the testing puzzle by helping you decide what deserves attention first, especially when resources are limited. Threat analysis is the practice of understanding who might target your organization, what they tend to do, what pathways are most likely, and what conditions make those pathways easier. This does not require you to predict the future perfectly, but it does require you to be deliberate about which risks are most plausible and most damaging. A common beginner mistake is to treat every threat as equally likely, which leads to spreading effort too thin and failing to reduce exposure in the most important places. Threat analysis helps you focus scanning and penetration testing on what attackers are most likely to use, such as weak identity controls, exposed management interfaces, insecure integrations, or vulnerable internet-facing services. It also helps you understand the difference between generic threats and threats that fit your environment, because a threat that is serious for one organization may be less relevant for another based on assets and exposure. When threat analysis is integrated into testing, testing becomes more relevant, which increases buy-in and improves outcomes. A practical way to express threat analysis is by thinking in terms of tactics, techniques, and procedures, TTP, which describe how adversaries tend to achieve goals like initial access, privilege escalation, lateral movement, and data exfiltration. You do not have to become an expert in every technique to use this idea. You just need to understand that attacks often follow recognizable patterns. When your testing program is aligned to likely TTP, you can validate whether your controls actually interrupt those patterns in your environment. For example, if credential theft is a common pattern, testing should examine how authentication is protected, how privileges are granted, and how abnormal access is detected. If misuse of exposed services is a common pattern, testing should examine external exposure, patch status, and monitoring of suspicious access attempts. This alignment prevents a common program failure, where scanning finds thousands of issues and pen tests find a handful of dramatic issues, but neither activity is clearly tied to the real pathways most likely to be used. Threat analysis is the glue that ties testing effort to realistic risk reduction. Managing security testing also means managing the human system around testing, because testing results are only as valuable as the organization's response. The response includes triage, assignment, remediation planning, verification, and communication to leadership. If findings are delivered in a way that is accusatory or unclear, teams will resist and progress will stall. If findings are delivered with no prioritization and no context, teams will be overwhelmed and will focus on what is easiest rather than what is most important. A well-managed program ensures findings include enough context to be actionable, such as which assets are affected, how critical they are, how exposure occurs, and what the recommended next action is. It also ensures that ownership is clear, because a finding with no owner is just an alarm that will eventually be ignored. Good management balances urgency with realism, especially when a fix requires change windows, testing, or coordination across teams. The goal is steady reduction of exposure, not a burst of panic that fades without lasting improvement. Another essential management skill is controlling retesting and closure, because programs lose credibility when issues reappear or when closure is claimed without evidence. Scanning findings can return after a fix if the fix was incomplete, if configuration drift occurs, or if the underlying cause was not addressed. Pen test findings can reappear if teams patch one pathway but leave a similar pathway open elsewhere. Threat analysis can become stale if it is not refreshed as the organization changes. Managing testing means building a closure discipline where fixes are verified, where reopenings are tracked and learned from, and where recurring patterns trigger deeper improvements. For example, if the same category of weakness appears repeatedly, that suggests a need for better baseline configuration, better secure development practices, or better change controls, not just repeated patching. Closure is therefore not only a technical confirmation, but also a learning opportunity that strengthens the program. When closure discipline exists, teams trust that effort leads to real progress rather than endless loops. A mature testing program also avoids two common extremes that beginners often fall into. One extreme is measuring success by volume, such as how many scans were run or how many findings were produced, which rewards noise rather than risk reduction. The other extreme is measuring success only by dramatic discoveries, which can cause an unhealthy focus on spectacular pen test results while everyday exposure remains high. A healthier view is measuring success by posture change, such as reduced exposure windows on critical assets, reduced recurrence of high-risk weakness patterns, and improved detection and response performance when tests simulate real misuse. This posture-oriented view makes scanning, penetration testing, and threat analysis feel connected rather than competing. Scanning provides continuous visibility and trend data. Penetration testing provides depth and realism, and threat analysis provides relevance and focus. When leadership sees these activities improving posture rather than producing random reports, the program gains support and stability. That support is crucial because testing without remediation is just observation, and observation alone does not reduce risk. As you step back and look at security testing management as a whole, the most important idea is that each testing mode answers a different question, and your job is to make those answers drive action. Scanning asks where known weaknesses and misconfigurations might exist across the environment, and it helps you see drift and backlog. Penetration testing asks what an attacker could actually accomplish under defined conditions, and it reveals chained failure modes and assumption breaks. Threat analysis asks what is most likely to matter given your assets and likely attack patterns, and it helps you focus scarce effort where it reduces real risk. Managing across these modes means establishing clear scope, consistent validation, risk-based prioritization, strong ownership, and reliable closure verification. It also means communicating results in a way that supports collaboration and steady improvement rather than blame and confusion. When these pieces come together, security testing becomes a risk reduction engine that is predictable, trusted, and resilient to change, which is exactly what a mature security program needs.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit DailyCyber.News.